what I'm afraid of, probably the next step will be some European countries that might be sending soldiers in Ukraine to fight alongside the Ukrainian military directly against the Russians. European leaders, heads of states, heads of governments are slowly but surely walking towards a global war against Russia like sleepwalkers.
Thank you, Volodymyr, for hosting today's summit and for your courageous leadership as the duly elected democratic leader of this great nation.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air.
I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
The geopolitical situation is becoming increasingly tense. While the United States is attempting to negotiate a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, countries like ours, as well as members of the European Union, continue to announce billions in financial aid and military support to bolster Ukraine's defense.
That is why I am announcing Canada will be providing 25 more LAV-3 infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine. We're also dispersing the first installment of the $5 billion in assistance to Ukraine funded through revenues from frozen Russian assets.
According to Kiel Institute for the World Economy, from 2022 to the end of 2024, Ukraine has received approximately $430 billion in aid, with $128 billion coming from the United States alone. Meanwhile, about 1 million people are reported to have lost their lives in this conflict. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has expressed his readiness to send Canadian troops to the front lines.
Every step of the way, Canada has looked at the ways it can best help. And as I've said a few days ago, everything's on the table. We know that the Canadian military has ways that it can contribute. We're not going to get ahead of the discussions on how to keep a peace that isn't yet in place. But Canada will be there and is open to doing what is necessary, but those will be decisions taken in the coming years by Canadians and their government.
Meanwhile, Chrystia Freeland has raised the idea of a new world order and a strengthened alliance with the United Kingdom and its nuclear arsenal, suggesting that the United States could pose a potential threat in the future.
They want to work with us. It's time for us to step up at home, to urgently reach out to them and build a new world order where democracy and Canadian sovereignty is protected. That's why I would start with our Nordic partners, specifically Denmark, which is also being threatened, and our European NATO allies. I would be sure that France and Britain were there, who possess nuclear weapons, and I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a threat.
To delve deeper into this complex situation, we are joined today by Jean-François Caron, PhD in political science and associate professor at Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this.
I'm not dictating.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
So what we witnessed last Friday in the Oval Office, it's a confrontation between two visions of the world that are absolutely incompatible with one another. So on the one hand, you have the realist, so Trump, who has said for the past few months that it is time to end this war.
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying, Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying.
Because when you look at the reality of the battlefield, it's kind of obvious that Ukraine is not going to win the war. They're losing grounds day after day. They've tried everything in the summer of 2023 with their counteroffensive, with the Leopard tanks and all the Western material, and this offensive broke its teeth on the Russian defense line. And ever since, Ukraine has been losing territory in the Donbass region. So Trump has been looking at this, and he came to the conclusion that it's simply obvious that they're not going to win the war from a military perspective. And furthermore, I think it's important to say that for the United States, the real enemy isn't Russia, it's China. So what Donald Trump is actually trying to do here by reestablishing first the diplomatic links with Russia and then reestablishing normal trade relations with Russia, he's trying to isolate in a certain way Russia from China, because one of probably the most important geostrategic consequence of this war, the getting together of Russia and China, which has become a super powerful partnership. And it's really threatening for the United States. If China can benefit from Russia's oil and gas and strategic resources, China is simply becoming an even stronger enemy for the United States. So Trump is seeing this, and I think he's trying to do everything in his power to separate, to break this partnership, like Nixon did in 1972 under the advice of Henry Kissinger, when Nixon went to China and he recognized communist China. He met Mao Zedong. And it had the impact of breaking that communist partnership between the USSR and China. So I think Trump is trying to do the same thing. That's why he wants to put an end to this war. And obviously, on the other end, you have the empire of good, people who are in a Manichaean relationship, and they feel like they're in possession of the absolute good. This is what they're defending. And in front of them, they have absolute evil, so in this case, Russia, and they need to fight till the end. They need to destroy this evil empire. And when you look at this over the past 3 years, this has been the case, because the objective of the Western world has always been to get rid of Putin, to have a regime change in Russia, to make sure that Ukraine would regain the territory that it has lost since 2014, and also so Ukraine could join NATO. So these objectives are absolutely unrealistic. They cannot happen. And this is why the strategy of the Western world has been an endless dumping of money and military material, because, I mean, when you're fighting this type of war, anything goes. So I think Zelensky is the incarnation of this vision of the world, and Zelensky is being backed up by most of Europe. It's not unanimous. You have a few countries that would also like to see an end to this war, but Great Britain, France, Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states, they're really supporting Ukraine. It just shows that they're willing to fight till the end, no matter what the cost will be. So you saw Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, has announced more than 2 billion British pounds in support to Ukraine. And they will very likely use the frozen assets of Russian oligarchs that have been frozen by the EU since 2014. It's around 200 billion euros. So they will use that money to keep financing a Ukrainian war effort. But the problem is, what Ukraine needs first and foremost, it's not necessarily money or material. I mean, they do need material. They need an artillery shell, for instance. But what they desperately need are boots on the ground. They need soldiers. And you've seen images, just like me, of young men who are being arrested in Ukrainian cities. And they're being just put in the truck, and 48 hours later, they're in the trenches in the Donbass, and they're fighting the Russians. So there's no one lining up anymore in front of a mobilization office. There are no more voluntary recruitment. They basically have to rely on conscriptions. And so this is the real problem of the Ukrainian military. And what I'm afraid of, probably the next step will be some European countries that might be sending soldiers in Ukraine to fight alongside the Ukrainian military directly against the Russians. European leaders, heads of states, heads of governments are slowly but surely walking towards a global war against Russia like sleepwalkers. They should know, it's kind of obvious. If you face reality, they should realize that for Russia, that would be a big no-no. And Russia would retaliate if it were to be the case.
And they were looking to get Ukraine's rare earth mineral that they have, but I think Trump is not going to get the critical mineral.
Yeah, that's the other scenario that people have been mentioning in the past few days. So there's something very interesting. Nobody has been talking about this, but on January 16, so 4 days before Trump came back to the White House, Great Britain and Ukraine signed a 100-year strategic partnership. You can see this partnership. It's on Keir Starmer's website. I'm not making this up. You can read it in all its details. But apparently at that time, this is the theory, and it's based upon leaks from Ukrainian intelligence. So apparently at that time, during that visit, Zelensky actually promised that Great Britain would be the country that would have access to its strategic resources. I mean, people know about this because of leaks from the Ukrainian intelligence. It's obvious that Trump also knows about this. So maybe, just maybe, this is what explains that Trump just probably didn't care by just kicking Zelensky out of the White House and not signing this deal. Because in a certain way, I mean, if this theory is actually accurate, he knew that no matter what, even if they would be pushing for peace, the United States and its companies wouldn't get access to these strategic minerals in Ukraine because they had been promised already to British interests. So this might also explain why Trump wasn't so keen on being polite with Zelensky and doing everything to sign this deal. And you can also see in return, when you have a look at the situation, Zelensky has just woken up once again Europe in its support for Ukraine. Money is flowing once again towards Ukraine. For Zelensky, even though it was some sort of a setback in Washington, 24 hours later, I mean, he's doing pretty well. He has, again, woken up once again the enthusiasm for Europe in support for the war effort in Ukraine. Actually, he got what he wanted. He got the support, the renewed support from Europe. He got more than 2 billion British pounds. He's going to get way more money in the upcoming weeks and months because Zelensky doesn't want to sign peace in the current conditions. And he cannot sign peace at the moment as well, because it's kind of obvious. If he were to sign peace at this moment, he would have to give up about 20% of its territory. And for many Ukrainian nationalists, that wouldn't be acceptable. And if he were to do that, same thing that happened to German members of the German delegation who signed the peace treaty with the Allies in 1918, who all of them ended up being killed by extremists and Nazis in the early 1920s. You can be sure that the same outcome would happen to him. You would have very likely a nationalist in Ukraine who wouldn't be able to accept this situation, the partition of Ukraine, and Zelensky would pay the ultimate price for this, what would be seen by the nationalist circles as a high treason. He would very likely be killed. So he's not stupid. He knows that if he wants to stay alive, he cannot sign peace at this time.
So you were explaining to me that there is a huge difference between the ceasefire and the peace that Donald Trump wants for Ukraine and Russia. And there is also the Keir Starmer peace plan that is going to draft.
Yeah, but Keir Starmer's peace plan doesn't make any sense, because when you look at the details, he said two things. So we want peace in Ukraine, but in order to do so, we want Ukraine to be in a position of power. We want Ukraine to be able to dictate the terms of this agreement, meaning Ukraine needs to stop losing territory and it needs to start regaining territory. So when you look at the situation, as I've said, this is very unlikely that it is going to happen. So there's a problem here. And the second problem, he says any peace treaty with Russia will necessitate the United States giving security guarantees. And Donald Trump has been very clear. He's not going to give any security guarantees. He's not going to allow Ukraine to join NATO or to sign some sort of a partnership that would, in effect, be the same consequence as if Ukraine would be joining NATO. United States is not going to send troops on the ground to monitor the no man's land between Ukraine and Russia. So Keir Starmer is preparing a plan based on pure fantasies. So his peace plan is simply unrealistic. In all due respect, it's a waste of time.
But Canada have always been a country where we were seeking peace around the world. We were mostly following US, but now we are doing the opposite of the US. We just announced $5 billion and military weapon. And Justin Trudeau also said that he's ready to send boots on the ground. Where are we going right now?
Well, Canada is part of this empire of good. We've joined this unofficial partnership with the other European states that want to keep the war going, because we simply cannot accept any kind of compromise with Russia, because once again we're in this religious mindset. We're considering Russia as an absolute evil, and as similar to negotiating with Hitler. So this is simply impossible, and there are two reasons for that. First reason is, for the past 3 years, mainstream medias have been hammering every day, 7 days a week on these mainstream TV channels and radio stations. They've been telling people that Russia is a bad country, Russia is evil, Vladimir Putin is as worst as Hitler, if not worse. So we need to keep on fighting. Ukraine is fighting a just war. Zelensky now is the new leader of the liberal democratic world. I've read that. So when you're into this mindset, people are simply not asking themselves any kind of critical questions. They're just accepting this fact as if it was self-evident. And you see there's a unanimity among the political parties. It's not only Justin Trudeau who's going to step down in a few days as prime minister, but it's also all the candidates who are running to succeed him. All of them, that they're not criticizing whatsoever the direction that the country has taken for the past 3 years in terms of support for Ukraine is going to continue. And it's the same thing as well with the Tories. Pierre Poilievre has basically said the same thing that Justin Trudeau has said in the past few days. We're not even talking about the Neo-Democrats or the Bloc Québécois. I mean, all the parties represented at the House of Commons, they all share the same message. And second reason, there's about 4 or 5% of the Canadian population that is of Ukrainian origins. So that's slightly less than 2 million people in Canada. So, and these people are still attached to their roots, to Ukraine. So for any political leader who wishes to take power, this would be a political suicide to oppose the war effort and to oppose Volodymyr Zelensky, because that would mean for that party to lose 24 ridings in the upcoming general elections, and these ridings could make a difference between a victory or a defeat, or a majority government or a minority government.
Don't forget to go over, and I repeat, calltheelection.ca. This is a way for you to make your voice heard. So go and sign the petition to ask and to strongly request an election right now. We can't wait more longer. We need a strong leader to deal with Donald Trump. So go over, calltheelection.ca.